Okay, Mike, we've got you back in England, and you said this was the only time in your life when everything seemed to fall into place. You had some actors, you had spaces to work in, and then you had the extremely generous Peter James saying, "Do you fancy doing a production up in Sheffield?" And it all kind of fell into place for you. And this first production that you did was the Arabian Nights, and you've talked about that so what happened next, as it were?
Yes, it was. It was quite extraordinary, and even the Arts Council at that time, the Arts Council had a very different ethos. You had the right to fail, and they wanted to give you money, and they were encouraging. It's another story now. It was, and every time you applied each year, it's about 3 pages you had to fill up. Life was very much simpler, more amenable. No, not like that anymore, I'm afraid. Anyway, that's another subject. So, oh yes.
Can I interrupt just to say, the Arts Council approached you, or did you approach the Arts Council?
No, you applied.
Right.
But also, I seemed to have just the right people I knew, right contacts at the right time. Everything just fell into place. It was very good. And I worked very hard, and I was running the company myself. I didn't have an administrator. It was out of my flat. And I remember when they were performing the Arabian Nights at Sheffield, some evenings I would sit in a little office with a typewriter in those days, typing letters to everybody on the oh God, what's the magazine called with all the contacts?
Oh yeah,
contacts, isn't it? Yeah, with all the rep theatres saying, "Would you like our show?" Every letter separate and typed, and put in an envelope with a stamp. I worked very hard, but I seem to have endless energy. I seem to be going, 18 hours a day without any effort whatsoever. Anyway, the company was called Shared Experience. And we had lots of meetings and all sorts of silly names, Palm Tree Productions and things like that, because of Arabian Nights. And I was trying to think, what was it that the theatre was doing? And I thought that another part of this sort of philosophy of the theatre was, yes, that it was a shared experience. What does that mean? It's that these two groups came together, the actors and the audience, and this material was shared between them, and they both experienced it. That the actors experienced the performing, and the audience had the experience of living it and receiving it in a different way. But they could both be creative, because one of the great revelations that came out to me of this, when you don't tell the audience what to think, how to think, when to cry, when to laugh, when you aren't controlling them through very contrived music or lighting effects or the way the people are acting, they can see their own show. And that allows them to get absorbed. So they see the show through their own context, their own framing. And we can talk a lot about that when we get to another show, because really interesting. So it's giving the audience the same liberty in a way that one gives the actors, to be free to respond to it in any way they want. And that's why, in many ways, I always get pissed off with certain forms of political theatre, because they become propaganda. So you're being told what to think and how to think. And I don't think that's what art is for. You can show me problems, you can present problems, you can convey things, but as soon as you start telling me this is good, this is bad, this is a good character, this is a bad character, this is a funny character, oh, this is a funny Shakespeare line you don't understand anymore, so I'm going to go when I'd say it, and then you will obediently bleat like sheep, as most audiences do when they go to Shakespeare, So anyway, so Shared Experience became its title. And that was a bit difficult to start, what is the shared experience? Anyway, that was the name. And uh, when I got the grant, I had money for a year, and I thought, what am I going to do? And I'd read all these Arabian Night stories, and the first one had been so successful, I thought, let's create a repertoire of different Arabian Night stories in different styles and different structures. Okay, so I found a wonderful, so I got a company together. Now, the very ironic and sort of sad thing, and that's why I get the actors' names muddled up. When we finished this run of Arabian Nights and I was planning the next year, I got the company together, the 6 actors, and I said, now, we're going to go on doing such and such. And they said, oh, I want to do, I don't think I want to do that anymore. And I was absolutely shattered because I'd made the assumption, because this is what I wanted, that the actors wanted it. And of course, I've come to realize that they're not me, and they may be very happy to work with me and come back and work with me. But they also want to do telly and make a bit more money and travel and, you know, make a movie and become their own stars and, you know, things like that. And so I had to recast. And I thought, okay, I'll bite that, I'll swallow that, you know, suck it up. And I recast, except for one actor. You know, I think it was Celia. I think it was, yes, it was only, yeah, I think so. I should have gone and get it. I'll get a reference book out and look. Or do you want me to do it now? I could stop and, no, okay. You can cut all this bit out. So I got a group of, this time I think it was with 5 actors, and reworked it and created over a year 3 different shows, which we then eventually took to the Edinburgh Festival, the Fringe, and got a Fringe First and so forth, and it was all very lovely. Now, the second show was based on 2 very long shaggy dog stories. One was called The Rogueries of Delilah the Wily, and the other one was the Knaveries of Ali the Bad, or Ali the Scoundrel, or something like that, or Mercury Ali, that's what his name was. And they were very funny. Delilah the Wily was about this oldish woman who was the widow of the Caliph's pigeon fancier. And when he died, she thought she was going to inherit his job, and she gets kicked out of the palace. And she thinks, right, I'm going to show that fucking Caliph that I'm clever, I'm the cleverest person in Baghdad. So she runs around the city, doing terrible things to be fooling people, conning people, getting herself into all sorts of things, and eventually gets the job. And there were dozens of characters and lots of Keystone Cop type chases in it, and it was very caricatured and slapstick and funny. And I thought, we won't use the text at all. It'll be totally improvised. We'll keep the stories, obviously, the structure, and I thought, because there's a lot of narrative, I thought each actor could find his own or her own stand-up comic style. Like, I'm walking down the street and I see this old woman come up to me and I say to her, or whatever it was. So each of the actors found their way of telling their story, and then they'd act out their character. And sometimes they ended up playing characters of themselves. So I'd be playing a scene with myself. And it was great. It was very, very funny. You know, and it was one of those shows which I'd love. Oh, I would be so happy to do a funny show now, because people were on the floor, people were weeping. I mean, sometimes the show ground to a halt because everybody was laughing so much. And I didn't know what the actors were, you know, the actors were just wonderful. They were brilliant. So we did this very long shaggy dog story, and that was great. And then I thought, oh, let me do something serious. So I found a lot of rather philosophical stories. And the frame for that was a group of travelers crossing North Africa to look for a lost city, where they believe they'll find the solutions to their tragedies. And so we worked on those, and they were very different in tone and sort of studio, and the language was quite simple but clear, you know, and the clothing was different. In the first Arabian Nights, you know, the very exotic, lush one with lots of love and everything. It was a time when people were wearing harem pants and tie-dyed shirts. And so those were your ordinary streetwear. So you just wore those in rehearsal. So it was very colorful. For the Dalila one, they all wore white beige jeans and T-shirts and just jumped from character to character. And I think they were all in black for the last one, lots of flowing, soft black clothes. And they were performed in very different styles, different language, different use of space, different conventions. So I was already exploring this whole interesting area of creating worlds which are true to themselves. You know, and they have their own language of vision and energy and verbal language and what level of playing. And they were all narrated. And I think those last stories were all first person ones. So again, I hadn't explored that before. So there was a group of people, they would be traveling through the desert. So we created this journey, you know, this camel movements, and then somebody would tell a story. And then how other people entered your first person story became very interesting. I mean, there's a lot of technical stuff in this about storytelling, which is in my then what happens next book, you know, because that's a whole saga in itself. So what shared experience also did for me was just open up this whole world of storytelling and adaptation, which had never occurred to me before. And that's just been a thrilling adjunct to my work, you see. So we did those 3 stories, and we did 2 stories for kids in schools, because I think it was the Borough of Newham came to us, or I don't know how, we were doing the Arabian Night, and they said, the guy who was their arts person there at the time said, would you consider doing a show for children, for schools? And I said, oh, I've never done anything for children. He said, treat them like adults. And it's one of the few wise things that other people have said to me, wonderful. And so we took a story, which was a magic one, you know, with magic mountains and all sorts of stuff, and birds which transformed. And we did 2 versions, an hour version for the over 7s, I think, or 8s, 7 to 12, something like that, and a half-hour one for the, you know, 4 to 7. And we used to go into these, you know, classrooms at 9 o'clock in the morning, 9:30 in the morning. The actors hardly had, you know, actors in the morning, not the best time, in their own jeans, no costumes. We just get them on the floor in a semicircle and do the stories. And that in itself was a wonderful experience, so moving, because first of all, when we'd stop the show and finish it, we'd watch them in the playground acting out the stories, running around and acting out being dragons. And then one day a teacher sent us all these drawings and pastel drawings and paintings that the kids had done. And I almost cry now when I talk about it, because I found it so moving that out of this dull, shabby classrooms, you know, these kids had seen costumes and scenery and characters and animals and magic and fireworks. And there they were. And I thought, that's the shared experience. That's the audience participation. You know, really, I'm sorry, I'm just terribly overwhelmed by it. You know, it's almost always happens to me. I don't know why. It was such a big, because I didn't expect it. I didn't realize what it was achieving. I guess I think that's what it was. It was just extraordinary. So that consolidated this idea that you allow the audience to see their own show. The less you show them, the less you tell them, the more they create. And that's a principle I've tried to keep most of the time, you know, because, you know, so you don't quite know what you're going, and you feel free, you know, to do it. So that was kind of wonderful. So we had this extraordinary, the actors were actually on their knees. I mean, poor creatures, they were, you know, exhausted because we were touring. We were creating the 3rd show while we were touring. And we were also doing workshops and our own rehearsals because we were constantly honing these skills because we got very good at telling stories, the clarity, the logic of the narrative, you know, and all these things I've written about after, you know, now. It was very detailed and very precise, and then gave you this wonderful freedom. And we went up to Edinburgh, had a huge success. We went to St Andrews and, for the National Student Drama Festival. It was all very glorious. You know, we had a profit at the end of the year. And so we bought lots of musical instruments, lots of percussive instruments, I think, you know, big drums and gongs and all sorts of wonderful things. Because if you had a profit at the end, you had to give it back to the Arts Council, so we went out and spent it on things. But it was wonderful. And I think by then I had somebody who was my administrator, who used to work from my flat. Because originally I had been doing absolutely everything, selling the tickets, banking the money, paying the actors, getting the posters created. You know, it was an extraordinary time for me. I really I did things I couldn't believe I'd do, administrative things. It was, so you can see, I mean, as I'm talking to you, I'm realizing, and you can see, it was an extraordinarily rich, creative, wonderful period. I mean, you know, wonderful, and I feel very blessed to have experienced it in so many ways. It's like everything was sort of pouring in and out in a lovely flow all the time. So, okay, so we went to Edinburgh. We ended up in the following spring in St Andrews, came to London as we'd done a couple of times before, had a great time there. We went with the King's Head with all the shows. Peter Brook came to see the shows and said very sweetly, "Oh, that's what I'm trying to do in Paris." It was very nice and great. And then I thought, well, what am I going to do next? And I thought, when I'd been in Israel during the 73 war, the Yom Kippur War, which was only about a week long, but you know, it lasted longer than that. There was nothing for me to do. Nobody could find a job for me to do. And I felt very lost. And I went to an English bookshop or a shop that sold English books. And I bought 6 Dickens novels. I thought, this is the time to read Dickens, to just lose myself in these huge volumes. I'd never been able to read him before. I got lost, I got bored. But all I can tell you, this was a revelation. I sat in my flat and read, and I don't know how long it took me, but I read Martin Chuzzlewit, Great Expectations, Bleak House, Our Mutual Friend, Little Dorrit, Nicholas Nickleby. I think those were the 6. And maybe because it was the mood I was in, I laughed, I cried, I got terrified. I literally put Reed with my book back against the wall. I got scared at times. And the range of stories was just, and I thought, oh, how wonderful to be able to put those on stage. How could you do that in all their detail, not these terribly cut up stuff, but all the language, the endless characters, the complexities, the plots, the themes, the different stuff. Oh, and I thought, well, you can't do it. And then I think it was a critic called Robert Cushman who used to do reviews for the Observer. Said something about, you know, you just need time. I think Ken Campbell had done a 10-hour show or something. And he talked about, well, you know, you take the time you need. And I thought, actually, the show is such, you know, the company is such a success. It was a time of great openness when venues would take chances. Again, this was in the mid-70s, you know, that people were willing to try things. And I thought, why don't I try doing a Dickens novel? And I will do it over several nights. And I don't know how many parts it will need, how many nights. And the venues bought it, the idea. And we created 4 parts. And I think what we ended up with was about 20% of the actual text, which was pretty good. You know, it's a 1,000-page novel. I didn't pre-cut it. We started in rehearsal with the fat penguin books, and argued over every word. Then we started arguing over every sentence. Then we started arguing over every paragraph, and eventually we got rid of chapters. But it was a wonderful process of cutting, and I learned from that how you don't hack at things, you squeeze them, you reduce them like a very good broth or a very good sauce. Like a reduction, you squeeze it so you don't lose anything. And so, but the company, now, again, the same procedure, even more graphically happened. I said, okay, we're going to do Bleak House. And they said, oh, Mike, I'm really tired. This 18 months has been fantastic, but sorry, and only one actress, Pam Ferris, stayed. And Pam, of course, worked with me for 5 years. And I think probably, I don't want to offend other actors, but she's probably, for me, unique, one of the best actors I've ever worked with. She seemed to be endlessly resourceful. She had no ego. She was a wonderful colleague. She was a wonderful improviser. When we opened shows and everybody else was nervous, she was calm. She made costumes. She made scenery. She could play any character. She was, she never said much. And when she did say something, you listened to her. She was, so I was blessed with her. And so she stayed. And I got another 6 actors, and we started working on Bleak House. And we got the first 2 each part was meant to last like 2.5 hours. So when we did the first run throughs of the first part, it took 5 hours. The poor actors had to unlearn half of what they learned, and that was very painful, but they knew the book. And so we ended up with we started off just touring the 2 parts, which audiences were very happy for. So we toured all over the place, to all these venues. We were very well connected. We got, we made our tours quite comfortably. We went everywhere. We went to Scotland, we went to the Belfast Festival, a little bit in Wales. We went lots around Yorkshire, masses of places around, not very much in the south east or the southwest, I have to say, but periodically coming into London. And we made the other 2 parts while we were touring. And I thought by the time they got to part 4, they were like, waterlogged. I thought, not another word will go in. They've got 7 hours of Dickens language, but they did. And we told the story in 4 parts, and it was kind of wonderful. We did them at the Royal Court upstairs, and we did all 4 at weekends. And people would come for, afternoon, evening, on Saturday, afternoon, evening, Sunday, and see the whole thing. And it was a very moving experience just to see the whole thing. And when we'd been touring, people had actually travelled to different places to catch up the other parts. People would go from Leicester to Wolverhampton or something. It'd be wonderful. It was just, a wonderful time, and nothing except 6 black folding chairs, which were painted black. And the actors wore black grey shows, black grey clothes, and again, things that they would wear. And luckily at that time, there was a period of maxi dresses. So the women, without problems, the women could have long skirts, and the men wore, if they wanted to wear sweaters or jackets, they didn't change clothes for any characters, never. They just transformed how they were within them. And no props, nothing, except an empty stage with the 6 chairs and 7 actors. It became 6 actors because we lost one along the way. And that's a sort of sad story that he was a nice enough guy, but he didn't quite fit in, and the women took again him there was something about him, and he got very rattled and he didn't function. And then we managed to divvy up all his parts between the other 6, God knows how. I mean, endlessly resourceful in those days, I don't know. And we did the show with 6 people. And I think we did 110 roles, and I think we lost about 7 or 10, something like that. and they were all worked on, they were all detailed. Each different world of Bleak House we came to was another style, you know. And of course, the book, as you know, is written in two styles, in the first person past tense by Esther Summerson, very much emotional, full of feeling, slightly sentimental story of this young woman just trying to find her as an orphan, trying to justify herself in life. And I got very irritated with literary critics who said, oh, she's just another of those weak, wimpish Dickens heroines. Well, she wasn't. She was somebody who'd been told that she shouldn't have ever been born because she was illegitimate. And she's trying to belong somewhere. And psychologically, she was absolutely astute, and it was very moving. And the other chapters were in the present tense, third person, very cold, very ironic, very satirical, and they counterpointed each other. And the story came together, and you just got glimpses of it. It was so, I mean, what brilliant construction. I mean, I still sort of collapse in awe in front of that edifice of that thing, and I know people now are creating much longer shows, and great, wonderful television shows, which are really complex. But I mean, these were extraordinary, but they need time. So we did the show, as I say, 4 nights, about 10 hours. And again, it was kind of wonderful. The critics were a bit iffy. Michael Billington had taken against adapting novels for the theatre. So he was very sour about it, but there were other critics who were good. And I think in the end it got, rather, it was well received and very moved, and we toured with it and so forth. And again, the other revelatory thing in terms of audience that came out of that was the following. When I'd been trying to decide how I should, what style, what world this Bleak House was, I realized it had so many styles. It was very Kafkaesque. It's a story about a family who get trapped in the system of law, which they never, sort of pursuing inheritances, and they never extricate themselves. And it goes from generation to generation, and it goes on and on and on. So it was very Kafkaesque because there was no end to it. It was very politically right on about a very reactionary establishment, which all Dickens novels have in them. It was the first detective story. There was a detective in it and a mystery. It was very funny and so forth. And you think, which one am I going to do? And you thought, no, what I will do is be true to each aspect of that story as it comes along. We will play it. And the third person present tense things will be a little icier, and all the Esther Summerson will be that much more emotional. And the actors, again, were wonderful, worked hard and created this gallery of Dickens characters, and not mugging them, even when they were grotesque. We gave them, well, it's a life and humanity. And it was great. So with all these different stories or styles or worlds that Dickens created, we thought, well, we'll just give them to the audience. And it was obviously the right thing to do, because I remember people coming up and saying, oh, I haven't laughed so much in ages. God, it's funny. And then somebody saying, oh my God, it's politically so right on, isn't it? And then somebody would say to you, it's very Kafkaesque, isn't it? And then somebody would say, oh, it's so lovely. Oh, it's like, so people were seeing their show, and that was revelatory. You thought, yes. And a French woman finally came up to me and said, thank you so much for allowing us to see our own show. And I thought, oh, wonderful. And then this imagistic thing of people seeing what isn't there was wonderful, because people would say to me, but what do you mean you didn't use anything? The lighting was wonderful. The gaslight, the firesides, the chandeliers, the candlelight. And it was white light solidly for 10 hours on the audience and the actors, but the audience had created their own images. That had happened in Arabian Nights, when somebody was trying to identify an actor and say, oh, that wonderful actress with the long black hair. And I said, no, there was an actress with medium length red hair, Pam, but she played a princess. The audience, we'd allowed the audience to see their own show we've given them space, and people. So I feel that is real uh, audience participation, not these kind of corny immersion stuff, which is fake. I think, because you're being bullied and pushed and shoved around and answering. No, you saw what you wanted to see. So those were incredibly profound experiences for me, and wonderful in learning about theatre, about storytelling, what actors could do. And again, I repeat, there was no furniture, and the actors became wonderful at miming. Particularly an actor called James Smith, who was absolutely wonderful. He, putting he played Tulkinghorn, who was a very, very sort of arrogant and very conniving lawyer. And he had glasses that he put on, which are just wonderful, and books he opened. And it was so effortless and quite wonderful. And later we did a show, an Evelyn Waugh show called A Handful of Dust. And he played a sort of rather pompous upper-class ass. And there's a scene where he's in a club having dinner, eating prunes, having a conversation. Well, the prunes became quite wonderful, So here we go, it's not fair maybe to say this about actors now, but I feel actors were more open to try things then. I think it was a happier world. It was a more optimistic world, the 70s. We were going to solve all the problems. People had money, people weren't unemployed. The theatre was exciting and examining things. And I think there was a totally different ethos, different mindset. And therefore I think actors were more expansive. Now, over the last 15 years, I felt people, in a way, closing off, wanting to get it right, wanting to please you, so they'd know what they were doing so they could get a job, rather than saying, oh, let's try it, it doesn't matter. If it doesn't work, let's chuck it away. I think that you probably remember a lot of this, but I'm sure the attitude had changed tremendously since then. Yeah? Yeah. So that's the beginning of shared experience, the first 2.5 years, I would say.
Excellent. Mike, I think we're going to bring it to a close there. And looking forward to the next episode of Shared Experience.
I can't imagine what you're going to do with all this, Peter. I don't know. It's actually quite good reliving all this in a funny way.
Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed that chat. And if you did, would you press the like button and also the subscribe button? That would be great. And if you wanted to be given alerts to when the next one is happening, just press the bell button. If you want to put any comments or any questions underneath here, underneath the video, please do. And at some point I will re-interview Mike, as it were, and put some of these questions to him. So I look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you.